Hey everybody, welcome once again to the Rise of the GM. Today we're going to be talking about a nemesis that surrenders themselves, influences people who have influenced us in running our games, and a royal counselor who pulls the strings. Thanks for joining us here today on Rise of the GM. Well, Adam, we are back again for another episode. What are we at? 11 now?
11,
episode number 11. And today we're going to be doing a big piece kind of on some of the people who have inspired the way that we GM a game. And, you know, those people who kind of come in our lives, for all of us who are GMs, there's somebody who kind of inspired us, unless I guess we're watching YouTube or something. And that was the only experience we had. And we got inspired by that, which is also a way that can happen. But we're going to talk about some of those people. And then we're going to obviously at the end have our haversack of some questions, but we always have these two little pieces we throw in. We have the encounter and we have the NPC at the end. So we're going to start today with an encounter, and that encounter is one about surrender. And it's an enigma for our players. Let's read this and then talk about how we might kind of throw this one in, or what we might suggest if you're reading an encounter starter like this. So this one's called Surrender, and it goes like this. Without warning, one of the PC's most hated foes simply turns up at their doorstep, all right, alone, unarmed, and surrenders to them on the spot, no strings attached. And they say in here that no group of players is going to take this at face value, and I think that's pretty much true. Yeah. And so you'll have three options, and I like this one because they basically do say, hey, you got some options. It's only going to go one of these ways. Be ready for it. So you got three options. One, the surrender is part of a scheme. Two, the person is mind controlled. Or three, they're sincere. All right. So good villains always scheming against the PCs. We know this, right? That's their whole job in life, is to scheme against the PCs. And this is what your players will think is going on. Perhaps this enemy is wanting to find out specific piece of information, and they know their best chance of learning it is if they get their PCs with their guard down. Or maybe they're after something that the PCs have that they need to see in person in order to actually get. That's their best chance of maybe teleporting it away or something like that. Or this villain has a contingency plan for escape, if like a mental link to a mage, someone who's going to teleport them out, a group of ambushers waiting for the signal. So if the villain has been mind controlled, so then they've given you those three main options, and then they kind of give you an if. If they've been mind controlled, who cast the spell? And this is all for you as the GM to make up. If they've been mind controlled, who is it? You think about this. Who is it that cast the spell? Was it another villain that you either know about who is against this, or you don't even know about yet? Who could it be? And was it another villain, or perhaps an underling of this villain who is looking for a particularly cruel way to eliminate their boss, right? And they found a way to mind control them and send them with surrender to the PCs. Can the PCs break the spell if it's mind control? The mind control could also be due to spirit possession, in which case the spirit might actually leave the body and attack the PCs, joined by the villain who sees a golden opportunity here. So that could turn into a crazy fracas, right, with all these players fighting right here at the door. Yeah. Or could it be due to a malfunctioning magic item that the villain has on them that has somehow controlled their mind and forced them to do this? You know, maybe they got this sword that was intelligent and they thought, I'm going to put this on my side, but the sword was stronger than they were. And it's like, oh yeah, you're going to surrender. Yeah. Once your PCs find out, acting on that information is an adventure in its own right. So once they find out what it was, so was this an underling? Was this a competing villain? Was this an item? That's going to kind of further the way your campaign goes in its own right. The players will have the hardest time believing that this is a case where the villain is in fact sincere. But this option opens up what they say here is the most interesting role-playing opportunities. Why did they surrender? Was it out of genuine remorse for their evil deeds? Because of a religious experience? Maybe they've changed their ways, or due to some other factor. How does the villain convince them of their sincerity in this case? Do they turn this villain over to the authorities? Do they imprison the villain? Do they execute the villain on the spot? And Who else has a stake in that villain's fate once the world, once word of that surrender gets out? Once,
Right.
other enemies hear about this, what's that mean? No matter which option you choose, this plot will surprise your players, it says, and has the potential to take your campaign in directions you did not expect, then they did not expect. Particularly if they were predicting a showdown with this villain. And they make the point, if they're really have been thinking a long time about a showdown with this villain, you don't necessarily want to rob them of that. So
Right.
all of that is going to go into this option of a villain that comes and surrenders seemingly with no strings attached.
Mm.
And so, having thrown all that out there, what are some of your thoughts on this kind of basic premise for an encounter?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I feel like looking at two different things come to my mind of the trick. This is like a Trojan horse to get into the good graces of this party and then to betray them later, kind of thing. And I think
Yeah.
I'd want it to be, I think of that as more of a long term situation of not just like, okay, now I'm in the door and now, haha, you let me in, the kind of thing. It's not just
You've
that.
opened the
Yeah.
door, you
Um,
fool.
yeah, right. I guess you could do that for sure, but I think about this more long term. I'm talked about my Tolkien inspirations, but we're reading the Silmarillion, and there's this situation well before the Lord of the Rings books where Sauron like befriends the elves and makes himself, he's a helper, he's the giver of gifts, he's all these things, and he's working with them all the while, like not the elves, I'm sorry, the Numenorians, and the whole time he is like weaving dissension and things like that behind their backs. And I think about that with that'd be a good thing, especially if you have like a villain who this is actually become. It's not just somebody they didn't like. It's not somebody they just dealt with one time and somehow they got away. But this is somebody that they desperately do not. They despise. They want to see taken out or taken down. For them to suddenly work and like try. I feel like there's some complexity there as a GM, but like actually working that in a way to they are helping, they are befriending, they are doing things for the party, and then having this turn, at the end. That's one way. I don't know. What do you think about that before I move on to the next one?
Okay, so the idea of the Trojan horse, let's call it, the coming in to infiltrate. I agree. I think it has to be somebody who is long-standing, somebody that they really hate. Otherwise, it doesn't carry any weight. Dude shows up that you just heard is a bad guy in a village and says, "I'm turning myself in." Well, they'll be like, "Oh,
Right.
well, let's hear him out because we got to understand him." That's not going to be much of a contradiction at all.
Right.
It's got to be that person. And so immediately, we've talked about the campaign that I'm running now. We've talked about this villain that everybody hates named Sizen. If Sizen would show up at your door and be like, "Hey guys, I've been wrong," you guys would have a hard time, especially
Right.
Josh,
Yeah.
would have a
Yeah.
hard time believing that this is true. And because of that, that would make the role playing part bigger. I'm going to let you talk about your other kinds of because if it's the Trojan horse, there's
Yeah.
if they're being controlled,
Right.
and there's they really mean it. So
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
on with your other,
Yeah.
if it's in fact this, then.
Right. So one thing I think to say with that, with like the Sizen idea, if that was a thing, and I guess moving into what I'm trying to say is, my question is like, uh, okay, the thing that comes to mind for me is like, who's more dangerous than the person that is our typical villain, kind of thing. And that's the thing that kind of comes to my mind is, okay, what's the cause if this person's like totally opposed to us and has been, and this is like has been coming to a head, where's the point where that person is like, no, 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 we need to partner, because that comes to
Because the
mind for
big
me.
bad is
Yeah.
actually much bigger and much badder than you
Right.
even
Right.
thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I we have talked about this, and this is kind of actually digging into who has inspired me, kind of thing. But we've talked about like peeling back the onion kind of thing of the story gets bigger, as you get deeper. And I think that's a way to do that is, okay, we're opening kind of the next chapter of things are getting a little more epic here because we've been dealing with this person and they've been giving us a hard time. But now we need to actually come together because they're coming in hat in hand at the door like, I've got nothing, whether that's I released something into the world and I messed up, or the person I've been working for is a crazy person and they're going to destroy everything. We have to do something about that, or whatever those things are. I think that gives you an opportunity to like bring it bigger. Whether it's like this was local, now it's world. This was world, now it's cosmic or planar, or whatever you want to think about.
I like that thing you said. It's a step up in
Mhm,
epicness.
yeah,
It's a
right,
step up.
right,
And so, yeah, you wouldn't do this maybe in your second session ever, or you
mhm,
wouldn't do it in like, when they're at level 3. It's just not a big enough epic move. I mean, you could say, oh yeah, the governor in the town who was like giving you guys all a hard time comes to your door and is giving up. It's like, well, that doesn't really tell the same kind of
right,
story or have the same kind of tension as when you get to like level, 10 or 11. You've gotten pretty powerful and you've been fighting this guy and like struggling even from the local
yeah,
to the more continental
mhm,
uh, over the world. You've been chasing this guy and all of a sudden you find out, oh, he's not the biggest, baddest.
right,
We thought he was all this time.
mhm,
But now we've realized there's like bigger. And then, I was thinking you wouldn't do this at level 20 when you're wrapping it up. But then I thought, well, if you're thinking I'm going to go with a mythical campaign, that's the perfect time to like this thing that's been just like the hugest problem you could imagine suddenly becomes like not that big a deal
yeah, yeah,
comparatively,
for sure, for
So
sure.
that's a good clue. I'm gonna jump to the second one and say that I really kind of thought a lot about what would happen if this was due to, I think I mentioned it here, a malfunctioning item. If it were like an intelligent item that this person coveted and got that somehow ended up being more powerful than him. And I liked the idea of it being something that if the person who is wearing it is killed, then it will take vengeance on whoever killed them or
Mm,
something, so that you couldn't just kill him and take it, but it's
right,
something that your characters strongly covet as well. And
right,
so you've got this conundrum of, okay, this is the bad guy and he's now coming and wanting to surrender to us. We can get information from him, but he also has this thing that we really want and need for whatever accomplishing our major goal is. Like this thing is, maybe it was prophesied, this thing is needed, but we can't just kill him and take it. So
right,
for a while we've got to travel the same path, but we got to be careful because one, if he ever gets free from it, he could be a danger. Two, if he gets killed, we got to make sure to get that thing
mhm,
before whatever killed him. But we can't do it ourselves. Like that could all be a very interesting path to take. And I'd have to sit down and do my what if, and
yeah,
journal
yeah,
out some what ifs about that. But that was an interesting flavor, aside from the just they are in fact sincere, in
right,
which case that's a whole new role playing thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I probably have the hardest time with that one,
The
or
middle one.
just like, or no, the sincerity, just
Oh,
them being sincere, unless it's like driven by something else of like, no, there's a bigger problem.
right.
That's a sincerity, even though that may not be repentance. It may not be like, I think about, we talk about the Sentinels comics in their lore for their card game. There's a point, and me and Matthew have played this, but like in Oblivion, there's this point where all these people who have been villains the whole time are like, well, the entire multiverse is going to be destroyed, or we can help. So we'll join the heroes, kind of thing. And there's
The
that.
enemy of my enemy is my
Yeah.
friend kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But, it's like as soon as, maybe not for everybody, but basically as soon as that event's over, they're back to being villains, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think about that, but first, like sincerity, just straight, like I love redemption. I love that, but I think for like a villain in a game where there is that buildup of we don't want to take things away from the players, maybe just having somebody show up and just like, yeah, I'm a good person now. So all's forgiven and now we're going to move on to the next arc of the campaign. You know, like that's what that kind of feels like to me
Where it
without a
could
deeper
be
voice.
interesting, this sincereness. You made me think of it when you mentioned Sentinels of the Multiverse, and we keep mentioning that. It's a great game, great kind of, they did a lot developing like the backstory of how this all was. If you
Yeah.
ever check out Sentinels of the Multiverse, the card game and then the role-playing game. But in the card game, you actually are fighting this machine, AI called Omnitron, and it's trying to beat you, and it just can't, and it keeps making new versions of itself to try and beat you, that try to be better and better. And the very in version 10, Omnitron X, it thinks, okay, the reason I must always be losing is maybe it's something that humans have that machines don't have, and so I'm gonna build this empathy engine to understand who humans are. And so he builds this empathy engine, and immediately upon turning it on realizes what humans are and like why they're fighting, and like realizes that it's been the villain this whole
Right.
time. And then so Omnitron X becomes a hero. So that would be like this:
Yeah.
Omnitron X comes to the door and says, guys, I have been doing this and I am sorry, but now I've set into motion this factory that's producing all of these, all these machines to fight us. And it is going, and so I loved in that game that you could fight against Omnitron in the factory that builds all the Omnitrons,
Right.
or Omnitron as the factory, which was one iteration. And then with Omnitron X on your side, who was a hero. And so that could be a way that like something's like, again, if it's not like, oh, there's this big bad guy that none of us knew about who is just like worse, it could be, I've set in motion this thing, but I've suddenly realized the error of my ways. Like Omnitron X, when he got that empathy engine, comes in and is like, I want to fight with you guys, which is different than just like, I totally surrender. It's like,
Yeah.
so that was something you just made me think of that I hadn't thought of until just this moment. But yeah,
Kind of maybe a twist on even the mind control. And I don't know how exactly this maybe shifts the feeling of it, but there is that like trope of people doing bad things because if they don't, then somebody does something to someone they love, kind of thing. Or it's like,
someone else
they have
suffers.
my family, and if I don't do this, if I don't keep doing these things, it's different, but I feel like it's in that vein of uh, you have a little more maybe agency if you're in that place, but you're still kind of in a spot where you have to follow this plan, and I think that could be a thing you could bring into that too, of like, okay, I want to break this cycle. I'm speaking as the villain, like, I'm here. You've proved that you have some strengths. We have differences, but here's the situation. What if we join forces to break this cycle, and then you win in a different way, kind of thing. And I think that could bring some interest into the story also, with that kind of idea. Because I wonder with the mind control, I do like the item thing a lot. I like that a lot. If it's just somebody mind controlling somebody, like I've dominated this person and making them do all these things, I think it gets kind of weird. Like, what do you actually do with that villain that you've been, what I mean? I feel like there's even like a letdown of like, oh, they just come to and realize, oh, that's not who I am, and I don't know as a player how interesting that would be.
So this is some idea they sprinkle that can kind of throw a twist into the plot. And again, if you're coming up with you say you've like kind of planned where you think this campaign is going to go, this might even for you as a GM spark something that you can get creative with and twist and change the way you end the game.
Yeah.
And that's one of the beauties of being a GM is you don't set the story in stone at the beginning and the players have to get there no matter what. Sometimes it's fun to like let the story unfold together. And so as a GM, having these things that give you options and like throw twist into your thinking are good things.
For sure.
So, yep. All right, well, let's move on to our main topic for today. And that is the idea of people that have inspired us. All of us in some way were inspired to begin GMing, to think I could do that. And whether that's because it's somebody you know who GM'd for you, or you just always love the idea of the game and you could never find a game and you're like, you know what, I'm going to be the GM. And so you start kind of looking and going on the podcast or seeing other people's games. Something inspires all of us. And it's typically when you see a good GM, when you see someone who can tell that story and bring the players in and make the sacrifices important and all of that stuff. So we want to talk a little bit today about some of the people that maybe have inspired us. So Adam, why don't you start us on this topic, and we'll just kind of see where it goes. We have no idea how long this one's going to go, or who all will be brought into this conversation, but we're going to go.
Yeah, these inspirations, have the ability to go for a while. So, and we could probably come back in future episodes and do more. I want to just like be encouraging, for one, and say like if you're someone who's jumping into the GM seat or have done that, like congrats to that. And, that's a really awesome. I think it's a really awesome thing to be able to step into that. Cause I know sometimes there's some like trepidation or cautiousness or like, I don't know all the stuff. So how do I do this? And, just want to encourage you all, to make that step and try that out for your groups. Because it can be inspiring. And I think, like we said several times, like, and what Matthew just said, seeing people run games a lot of times is inspiring to run a game for people and see that. But we both in our backstories talked about Danny with the WoW game at the beginning. Eric brought that up, when he was on. But Danny definitely, as my first GM, was like super inspiring. I don't think I really had a like a bug to run a game for a very long time until he was kind of deciding. It ended up moving, and so that would kind of stopped what we were doing. But the big thing for him, and just kind of talking about like themes that I see in people, was that like the weaving of the story. Like that was the first time I had experienced an RPG, but also just like that was the thing that really drew me in, was seeing somebody weave together like a long, full, cohesive story that had depth to it, and that there obviously was like thought put into that. That was really attractive to me. And like as I began to think about, I want to run some games, help bring people together in this way and have fun, that was something that was always in the back of my mind, is like, and I do think, and I probably said this before, but I feel like it still tinges the way I make games when I'm like planning and doing arcs and things like that. It's in a lot of terms, or a lot of things like that, where it's looking at just the way that Danny did that. So that was like a big thing for me. And then also just like seeing character development also was a big part of that. So my character specifically was Josephus Whiteleaf, the half-elf ranger. And in that, one of the things I got to see Danny do was bring different pieces of like my backstory in, and like that became like really a cool part for me, was to be able to see like how a GM would weave people's stories. And it wasn't just me, it was all the stories come together. But I really like grabbed onto that from Danny about just the way that he would take my character's backstory or things that had happened in the game and be able to bring those back and tie them in. And we talked about the 8 types of fun, and that's like a really big kind of gripping thing for me. So that was a big deal for Danny. Just like learning that from him for those like 3+ years that we played together. That was a really big deal. Matthew, who, I've brought this up before. It's kind of funny because like we're sitting here together, but we've learned a lot from each other and just like bouncing ideas like this kind of thing. But like for Matthew, that's the thing that I noticed from him running games was a continuation of like the weaving of the story, um, being able to just like grow a world and to have these arcs that like all connect together, bringing in a bunch of different people and their stories in this way that's just like a was really inspiring to me. And the more that like we've kind of passed back and forth the GM seat, that's been really cool to see that, of just like, oh yeah, like he did that. I really enjoy that. I can grab something like that and twist it and kind of make it a little more like malleable into my game. And like, how does that work? How does that look like in just like the way that these characters connect with each other, or um, you know, developing more of their story as they visit places, things like that. So that's a big one. But a big one with the way that Matthew has inspired me, how you have inspired me, Matthew, is like setting the scene. And I think that's something that if I'm gonna like talk about some of my weaknesses as a GM, I feel like the scene, not like just a typical like or general, okay, you're entering the city, and as you walk down these like clean swept streets, there are palm trees swaying in the breeze, and you smell the scent of spices and citrus and hear the birds singing in the trees. Like that kind of thing, I feel like comes pretty easily for me to like show that stuff. But the setting of a scene and making unique spaces when it comes to combat, I actually have a really hard time with. And I don't know, I'm still working that out about like, how do I get better? I'm trying to get better a little at a time. But that's something that like I pay a lot of attention to with you, Matthew, is just like watching that happen, because Matthew's scenes are in like combats or things like that are really good. And there's a lot of really the scenes that are like in my mind from games tend to be these really evocative ones that a lot of times have come from him. Danny had some of those too, where you know, I remember this one where there were three of us fighting on these like kind of bridges, catwalk type things, and I was in the middle shooting arrows over the top of my two friends who were melee people, and as these creatures were coming in, you know, just like paying attention to those kind of things in a scene. So like Matthew, that's the thing that like I really am inspired by you in, is just the way that like those combats feel because of the way you like set the scene. I think about like there's a gondola fight, gondola. I was getting mixed up. Gondola, you know, where, and we talk about this. This one always comes back up because it was so awesome, and we're on this like, you know, car on a cable going across this canyon land, and there's this huge fight that happens with these bandits that are coming across like like zipping down these lines, and I jumped off of it and had to be saved by my allies, you know, all this stuff. And those things just like were really important to me as like a player to like get into it. And so as like a GM, I pay attention to that kind of thing when somebody's really doing well at that. Cause I, like I said, I have a hard time. I think I'm better than just like, here's another 10 by 10 square box. But like, I feel a lot of times like, man, why are my maps so bad? You know, so I see that. I'm like inspired by that quite a bit. So yeah, just again, talking about kind of Danny with the storytelling, talking about you with the storytelling, Matthew, and then setting the scene, and then like Danny and seeing you both like tie in characters have always been super inspiring to me. So I'm going to toss it back over to you for a little bit. And
So this is an example of how a GM has to think on their feet. You guys may have noticed I popped off the screen. My computer just crashed. I did hop on my phone and listen to what you were saying as I was getting everything restarted. So I did hear that. And Adam had to keep going like, oh no, what's going on? It's just me. But he did it. But yeah, no, this idea of the people that inspire. By the way, my computer did an update last night. So that may happen again. If it does, Adam,
I'll
it's
just
just
keep
going to
talking.
go until I get back. Yeah, when I was thinking about the people that inspired me, I kind of went all the way back to the beginning. And so you guys have heard on this podcast me tell the story about the first time I ever played D&D. I was killed by a bush. The guy who ran that game was a guy named John Ulmer. And I don't want to throw him under the bus as the guy who just killed my first character and made me not play D&D for a long time. But he was the first guy to ever invite me to a game. And I think that's huge. You know, when you don't know about D&D, it can almost seem like, man, that's something that people inside know. And I'm not inside. I don't know about that. And if I come in, I'm going to just be like the whole time, like not knowing what to do, and I'm going to feel stupid. And so to have that person who actually invites you in, even if they end up killing you with a bush, that's one of those things that you have to take that step in order to be inspired to ever get to a place where you become the GM. And so as you are looking to become a GM, don't underestimate the power it is when you invite somebody into your game and how that inspires. So, John Ulmer, thank you for killing me with a bush as my first bard ever. I would say, and I've talked about that, you're going to get some stuff you've heard a little bit before, but I would say that the guy I roomed with named Pat Tolbert has inspired me in so many ways as a GM. And this is not just the play, because I think I told you guys, and you might remember that we would at first just sit and make up characters, write background stories to characters, make up these characters with all of these relationships and items, and we would just tell each other those stories, and we would never play the game, Pat and I. And but we would do that like constantly in our time living together over 7 years. We would write these character stories, and that's where a great love and a great inspiration for kind of getting beyond like this real surface character that's like, okay, I have a shield and I'm a barbarian, you know. It's like, well, that's not very exciting. And so we would go deep into what is it that makes my character tick. And because of that, as a GM, I think a lot about my NPCs, and I think a lot about the characters themselves, because I've spent so much time in that writing phase. Not to mention, last week I told you about like reading a ton of books. Pat Tolbert was the guy who sent me that list of 7 pages of single-spaced titles of books that I needed to read. And the inspiration that has come from those books also in part was that inspiration of Pat. And so I can't underestimate, or I can't kind of speak enough about the inspiration he had in my gaming life and my imaginative life and my creative life, all of those things together. But then, like I said, I didn't play D&D after being killed as a bard. I didn't play for years because I thought, man, that was horrible. I got killed. Again, nothing personal there, John. I'm appreciating you inviting me into the game. But I didn't play again until I moved here to Charleston, and Adam, whichever direction he is, invited me to the game that they played. And I came, and yes, Danny, the one he was talking about, was the one running the game at that time. And kind of fired my imagination once again for what it could be, because of 2 specific traits that I really appreciated with Danny, maybe 3. But the first was his ability to make you see what he was seeing, like the super descriptive, it wasn't just like you walk into a room and there's a treasure chest. What do you do? Oh, I open it. Okay, inside you find some diamonds. He would be like, okay, as you walk over to the treasure chest and you begin to open it, and he'd be making the noises and
the sound effects,
painting the picture, and like you suddenly found yourself like hanging on to his words and like seeing all of this in your mind, and like that to me was like, oh, that's what I want to do as a GM. I want to make people see this place. Secondly, was his ability to roll with whatever you threw at him and like come off with some kind of crazy thing you didn't expect and make it part of the game. And then he would write down in his notes at the end of the night, this stuff happened. And then that would become incorporated into the campaign. It was he was not like stuck to a rail at all. He didn't have rails. He was making up the story as he went, as much as you were making up the story. And that was like really cool.
Yeah.
There was a third thing about him, but I just lost it and can't remember what it was. It may come back to me. But Danny was a huge inspiration for me in how that would go. And then, not that we're sitting here just throwing compliments back and forth. Adam said he really liked Matthew, and Matthew taught me some stuff, and I'm saying some stuff to Adam here. And I think a big part of what Adam did that was inspiring to me was I saw him playing with me, and then he decided to be a GM, and he did it. And I remember thinking, oh, wow. I guess us normal peons can also do GM work, because Adam, the peon, just not calling you a peon, but like just seeing Adam like say, hey, I think I'd like to take a shot at this. And then as he did it, I'm like, oh yeah, I could do that too. And I'd have to think about it, and I'd have to have him help me, because I don't know the rules as well as any of these guys, but I sure do love imaginating. That's a word. Imagining. And so at one point when he finished a campaign, I said, yeah, I'll try that. Yeah. And occasionally through the week, and you guys know this, if you're GMs who are just starting, you typically have somebody you're like, hey, I'm thinking I want to do something, but I don't know how to do this. How would you do that? Or where's the rule for that? Because I remember you did something once with, and you lean on these GMs who went ahead of you. And that's kind of what this podcast came out of, is the idea that we wanted other people who were like looking to kind of step into that GM role to watch this and get inspired and like start to think, I could do that. And, we've had people in our games, one of them who is often on here commenting, Josh, and he just made the comment. He said, yeah, that's me messaging Adam 4 times a week. It's true. It's cool when you first start. And this is going to kind of get into our haversack questions a little later. I'm excited about that. I'm not going to go there yet. Yeah. But then even as you're watching the people that you gamed with begin to take turns. And this is one of those things that to start people off with, in your gaming groups, to like let that be known that this is something that can pass around. And I'd like for you guys to consider doing a one shot or like a little 3-session arc, something like that, to give them the chance for 2 reasons. 1, to give them the chance to experience it. But 2, so that it's not so long that if they're really struggling, that they feel like, I hate this and I'm just going to quit and I'm leaving. You don't want to say, okay, why don't you run a year-long campaign while we all go from level 1 to level 20, and then they get in there and they just feel like, I really don't like running this stuff. I just want to play, do something with time limits, a beginning and an end. Yeah. But giving people the chance. And so when I would see, Eric come in and Evan, both, who would have these like really kind of ingenious ways of using tables to set up randomness that I didn't expect. I'm like, oh, I like that a lot. Yeah. I'm gonna incorporate some of that, or the way that just all the different players that we've had in our games step up and run. We've had so many from our table run different sessions, and I think I pick up a little bit from each one of them. But going back to like my main inspirations, it would have been I think if I had to hold up 2 big ones, it'd be Pat Tolbert with all the creative stuff. Never actually gamed with him. And then Danny, because he was like the first guy I saw, and kind of the one that I'm like, ooh, I really could pattern after that. And then I picked up stuff all along the way from like lots of different players. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I had that written down, but I feel like any DM I've ever played with, there's at least a thing that I'm like, either I'd like to take that and like change it a little bit and move forward, or that's a really good idea. How could that like be implemented in the game? And I think that's really, like a good, like, just like to encourage us, as we develop as GMs, whether you're starting or you've done it for a long time or whatever, of just that kind of entering into like, I'm going to come in here as a learner, kind of thing, and observe and see like maybe somebody does do something better than me. That's a for sure for me. I know, I'm like always looking like how can I do this better? But Josh brought that up about, messaging a lot during the weeks. And that's been a huge like inspiration point for me too, with that kind of thing of talking to Josh about games, or um, Barry, talking to Barry about games, whether he's either been running or like playing in. There's an aspect of like just the communication between people about different games where it's like, oh, that's like a really cool story point or a really cool idea of how they implemented that. Or man, I wouldn't want to do that, kind of thing, of even those kind of things of kind of developing, even keeping sharp. We play 5e, on Thursday nights right now, during my game. But talking to Josh about like his Pathfinder game, helped me stay sharp when it was like, okay, now I'm running some Pathfinder games. Also, being able to know like, okay, I actually remember the rules, those kind of things too. So that's all been really inspiring to kind of see those things and see people step into those roles too. As far as like, so I really like personally, I watch a lot of actual plays or listen to actual plays, and have for some time. Kind of got into that. I think first, there's a podcast called RPPR, Role Playing Public Radio, that I started listening to. I'm not really sure like where that came from, but I did. And then, a lot of people know Critical Role. That's a actual play that I have listened to a lot, and picked up a lot of things from. And then, more recently, there's an Iron Sworn podcast that I listened to, that they ran part of a campaign about that game also. And that was the designer and his son. But so listening to actual plays, and not jumping ship to a thing, but that is something where I found a lot of like influence from. And I think like one of the things I would make a disclaimer for is it kind of depends on the actual play you jump into. But, a lot of these we can have access to now are, there's like a team that works on these things. There's a lot of production, and I think that's super cool. But the like other side of it is we need to not be like discouraged of like, I can never attain that, or like, man, heck, how do they pull this off? It's like, well, a lot of people did a lot of work through the week that maybe somebody working a 9-to-5 job can't necessarily put into, so that's the disclaimer with that. But having said that,
let's throw into that disclaimer really quick. Somebody working a 9-to-5 job. I'm actually sitting here at work and someone just knocked at my door. That's why I got up and left.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do your passion stuff right in the middle of your work.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to like stop for work.
Yeah.
But yeah, that idea of when you watch Critical Role, there's a whole lot of people working and putting in a whole lot more than you might be able to do.
Yeah.
And don't feel like you have to be that, or don't feel like your players have to be those players. I can tell you, I've never really done a lot of watching actual plays because time probably is a big one. But I do know that the few times I've watched little clips, they'll have excerpts of people from Critical Role. Sometimes I watch those and I'm like, oh man, those people are so overly dramatic. Some of those girls. And of course, everybody watching may be like, hey, that's our favorite. But for me, I'm always like, man, my players are never going to be like those people. And that's okay. That's okay too.
Yeah. I did want to disclaim that, but having said that, I mentioned like RPPR, and this is kind of a funny one, but like, so Ross Payton and Caleb Stokes both are contributors on that, and both have they run a lot of stuff, but specifically, we've talked about red markets. We're going to talk more about that and kind of like break down the game at some point too. But listening to both those guys run red markets campaigns, this may sound funny, but I feel like it helped me to not worry so much about like killing people and not worry so much about being like super nice. And I want to be like kind at the table, obviously. Like that's not what I mean, but it's I do think early on, and I still have this in me where I'm like, "Oh, I don't just want to like wipe people out or like, and I don't want to come in like trying to kill people, but listening to the way that those games are a little more deadly, or it's like part of the game is actually kind of the like deterioration of the people, of the characters, happening. So I think that helped me a little bit, even in like a D&D setting, of being like, it's okay if um a character even dies. I'm going to be okay with that. I don't want to do it purposefully, and I'm not going to take joy in it, but like that's part of the game too, and it's part of that, a thing maybe I was missing when I was like pulling punches or trying to be too like hands off with that kind of stuff, was like, is it taking away the seriousness or the stakes that we've talked about so many times, so they taught me that, just to kind of give them a call out there too. But talking about Critical Role, there's a lot of stuff, I think we could pull. There's all kinds of stuff. I think Mercer does a really good job of sharing like tips and things like that, but things that like I've just like observed that I wanted to point out from him that I do really appreciate, was like creatively dealing with situations that maybe before, it's almost like the thing you were saying, Matthew, about like the way Danny would explain, like even there's a treasure chest full of diamonds. It's like you could just say that, but like the experience of it is a thing too. And kind of it's different, but in the same way, like the thing I feel like I picked up from him and want to implement more is there's things like death. Going back to death for a second, that death is like a not just like, okay, they're dead, now we're going to jam a resurrection potion in them and now they're alive, but watching like kind of it be an actual like situation that the whole group kind of takes part in, almost like a ritual, or like we're going to actually story this out, not just like make it a 30-second thing and now you're back up on your feet kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated watching that happen, because I think it even makes it more interesting, and there's more depth to it. And then the other thing is like, and I've tried this and it didn't work as well for me, but there's certain situations. There's a scene in my mind of I think it's from their second campaign, where one of the characters was in a situation with their patron, and there was like a fight that took place, and Matt gave all the other players like, you're running these things that are attacking her kind of thing. And so everybody was involved in that. Now I tried that recently. Some of you guys who are in the game may remember there was a werewolf situation, and there was a fight that happened, and it lasted one round. And I was like, well,
we were so killed.
Yeah, it was
werewolves.
I was like, oh wow, that was a roller coaster for me, because I'm like, first I was like, oh shoot, our one player is going to die, which wasn't the hope here. And then it was immediately like, nope, everybody else is dead, so so it didn't turn out as well for me. But I really like that idea, because there are times when it's like, okay, if I just focused on like this one character, like having a battle, we could sit there for hours. Unfortunately, like everybody else could just be like, is this over yet? Kind of thing. But like including people in that, I think is a thing that I kind of picked up and tucked away in my brain of like, I really think that was a smart idea to implement in different ways. So those are some like actual play things I feel like I've been influenced in and have taken inspiration in.
Yeah, I'll say I probably don't have as much experience with those kinds of inspirations. I will say that I do think that there has been some great inspiration from some of our players that bring new kinds of games. So it's not necessarily like being inspired in necessarily how to GM this specific game, but like having players who have brought lots of different kinds of games to our table. And we've kind of hinted at like red markets and upwind, and it's the Sentinels RPG or the Delta Green, which I don't think we ever played actually, but we talked about it.
Yeah, yeah,
But like those kinds of different, though every one of those that we play inspires me in some way. Like the whole mechanic being different
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
makes you think differently about how games can happen and go. And you can pull that into the game you're doing, even if it's like, like the upwind thing was all about the cards, and it was like which is higher, which is lower, and what happens because of that. You flip out these cards, but you can do some stuff like that even in your D&D campaign because you're the GM.
yeah.
I would say I was also highly inspired recently by a new addition to our table, Royal Robinson.
Yeah,
If you're
yeah,
here, this is about you. But this idea of having characters that meet from other games more that have happened in the past, and different games that are happening at the same time, but having these characters pass through your campaigns and having them more than just like a cameo, but having them have like important aspects of the game. That's been
yeah, yeah.
very
Right.
inspiring for me as well, because often I would get in this idea that we're in this campaign and therefore it's a closed system. And Adam's talked about this idea of using the same land and the same histories. And I had kind of thought of that a little bit, but the idea of like a guy who was a major character in this
Yeah,
game now comes in and is like a mentor to this character who is in this game now, with a more active role. That's like,
yeah,
that was inspiring stuff.
yeah, for sure. That is really cool. Yeah, I would love to have Royal come and talk on this podcast also. So maybe you can seed that at some point.
Right, right.
Yeah, sweet.
Well, I think as far as inspiration stuff for me, that's not. It's funny how like I was like all about books, and I'm like this book and that book and this book, and here's 17 other books, and I can't stop saying books. And we get to people, I'm like, I have 7, I have 5, whatever it is, and that's it. Is there anybody else that you wanted to mention in this?
Um, I think I've tapped out my notes at least for today. So
Yeah.
I
I did
know
leave you
there's
for
more
2
out
long
there. And
sessions talking by
oh,
yourself.
that's all right. That's right.
Those of you watching, that's the beauty of live streaming. We used to, like when we would just record stuff, we could cut that out and you would never know.
Yeah,
But now you get to be part of our
yeah,
process. You
yeah,
get to be part of the
yeah,
whole organization of this thing.
yeah,
As my computer died and somebody came and knocked on my door.
yeah. And we can have a whole conversation within the chat, maybe with if
It's
one
like,
of us
what?
drops or something. So yeah,
Right. Well, let's go on then to our NPC before we get to our Haversack questions today. We
yeah,
have an NPC again every week we throw out that you could maybe drop into a campaign. And this week, Adam is going to read that for us and we're going to discuss it.
yeah. This is again from the book Masks. It was put out by Gnome Stew, and this is a royal puppet master. Sounds kind of interesting. The Chamberlain Martain Capella. Chamberlain Martain Capella. Sir, if I may be so bold, that's how he starts out here. The appearance: he wears a gold and blue doublet with matching breeches and a symbol of the Chamberlain's office adorning his neck. He has well manicured brown hair with a matching goatee. A silver earring hangs from one ear, a style which is all the rage in court these days. So very put together, very manicured, very stylish, it looks like. As far as role playing, he looks down upon others with a bored expression. Martain speaks slowly and deliberately, but doesn't hide his disinterest in what others have to say, picking and pruning himself while they talk. So very disinterested, very just distracted and just kind of waiting his own turn. It's what it sounds like. Personality: he lacks regard for anyone not of his station, who doesn't respect the weighty responsibilities of being the true ruler. The Chamberlain knows that he is the power behind the throne. So that's kind of revealing some things there about what's going on. Motivation: Martain endeavors to keep control of as much government as possible. He likes the real power in his own hands and out of the king's. Kings are prone to flights of fancy, fits of melancholy, and bouts of rage. Besides, kings come and go. And then his background, his inclination for political machinations showed at a young age, and his first taste of power established his unfettered appetite for it. Since then, it's been a series of carefully constructed plans to eliminate his opposition and become the only whisper in the king's ear. Martin wields impressive resources, but they're technically not his. He abhors adventurers and their ilk. They're troublemakers that he can't control. His plots are far reaching and are difficult to tie directly to him. So, Chamberlain Martin Capella.
I like this character.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like the fact that he is hard to ruffle. I like the fact that he doesn't care for adventures. And I like the fact that he is kind of that well manicured and bored. Like everything in that gives me something. I could see a guy, well, thank you, sirs, for your fantastical and exciting descriptions of what's going on in the countryside, but I don't think we need your help at this time.
Right.
The king and I, the court, will talk about this and we'll let you know. You may leave now. You know, just very like almost dismissive of adventurers, but at the same time so well spoken that it's hard to like decide how to, you know, you can't accuse him, you can't get him like so ruffled that he makes mistakes. I like this kind of character, especially for one that like they kind of continually see that is kind of a thorn in their side, but not necessarily felt as a thorn in their side, just like almost an unscalable wall for them.
Yeah. I was getting a little Southern gentleman in there. I don't know if that's what you're going for, but I
funny.
like it.
Well, when you were reading that, I was thinking of who was it? Gary Oldham. He played some role like that, or you could even think
Was
of
that Tombstone. Is that Tombstone?
Well, that's Val Kilmer.
Oh, Val Kilmer.
Yeah. Tombstone. The good thing I got two guns. But, yeah, I think those kinds of characters are interesting for me.
Yeah, I like that too. You know, it's almost like someone that like, sir, if I may be so bold, kind of statement even of cutting off the adventuring party. You know, they're like coming to the king with like, this is a problem that we need, you know, or oh, you know, and almost just like being redirected constantly, diminishing the problem, you know, pointing out like, oh, they obviously don't have their the abilities to take care of this kind of thing. I like that, just a constant thorn in the side, but not just someone you're gonna like outright be at like combat odds with, you know, kind of thing. It's more political and more like relational kind of thing. So yeah, I think
the good thing about a character like this in the story is not that he becomes like an enemy to you, but that you come in, you know, there's like this evil out there and you're trying to warn the king and the people. And I think it's one of those things where you have to come to the realization that the king is not the one you have to convince, but it's this guy. And so he kind of becomes a different kind of, he's not like an ally and he's not an enemy. He's a person that you recognize holds more power than would seem he should. And so you have to then, as your party, you have to fit him into your hierarchy in your mind of, okay, who do I need to convince and where do I get the help? And if I want the king to do stuff, this is a guy I've got to go through. And so he becomes like a role player, but one that is important in the campaign.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I think like a term for that. Like, I don't know if just it's a foil for your party, you know, kind of thing, like in terms of just like characters. Because I think it's more interesting too. And I think this is where they were going. It's not really even that this Chamberlain has like any evil intent or like, there's not plots necessarily that are like, oh, I'm going to take over the world. It's just, I want the power of this kingdom for myself. I want to run the show, which has a problem probably in itself, but like, it's not necessarily something, oh, we just need to oppose this. It's just the power structure has been. So I think you're right. And them kind of coming to an understanding of, oh man, we need to get in this person's good graces. But I just think about that, like with our party, currently, I feel like if that guy, there's a few of you who would just be like, we will never work with this person. And so that gets a little, it gets interesting with that too. I think about like even Rhoda in this game, the Jade Mask game, she was kind of a right hand woman to the Thieves Guild master, and she wasn't doing this. It wasn't like political machinations, but she kind of had some disdain, and that immediately like set everybody off. Like, we're done with Rhoda, so
It is the disdain, which is the
yeah.
tricky part of this.
Mhm.
It's the looking down upon
Yeah.
that will make most adventuring parties, most PC players like stand up and like bristle
Yeah.
at someone. You could come to have a grudging respect if the guy had an honesty to him, even if he was a little dismissive. If he said, like there was a separate meeting and you're like, listen, I know you guys may think that I overstep my bounds, but what I know is I control a lot of what happens here. I do care for the best for this city. I don't always believe you, but and so like if there's like this brutally honest kind of talk between you guys, even if there's disdain there,
Yeah.
sometimes PCs can come to grudgingly respect a guy like that who they see as working for the best for his,
Right.
domain, even if he's not the king and whatever. But when it's a disdain that is never like honestly talked about, that is like held, they're so aloof that they don't even consider that you need to like be spoken honestly to. It's hard to get PCs to be like, yeah, that guy's okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
That's Rhoda's problem.
Yeah.
She thinks she's all that.
I almost wonder, even like, I was thinking about how do you do that, and like a straight conversation, or maybe somebody overhears the rogues poking around in the hallways of the palace and overhears the Chamberlain having a legitimate conversation that shows that, of like, okay, there's like actual care for the people of this kingdom. He just wants the power himself, but like he's trying to do like, I think even some of that like info, then that gives them I guess it's not like necessarily a leverage, but there's some like relational leverage in that also. So yeah, I like the idea of, once again, it's like making them a little more complicated in order to bring people into that. So yeah, it's a good one.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into our haversack questions. We got a couple of those, I think, this week.
Yeah. Yeah, we have two. One is, kind of a double question in one, is from Wataya Hotel. But then we have a new person in the haversack, Chris Case. Chris is connected with us on our socials a couple times, and I do want to kind of just give a wow, the word just disappeared from my brain. Shout out is the word, is the phrase. I want to give a shout out to Chris, and then the Daywalker Syndicate that he's connected to. They are a game developer, and I've been looking at some of their stuff, and you can check them out on Instagram.
What do they look up? Daywalker.
If you look at Daywalker Syndicate, Daywalker _Syndicate is their like Instagram there too. But there's a game that called Wild Realms that I don't know if it dropped it at Gen Con, but it was played at Gen Con at their booth, and looks really interesting. I cannot sit here and explain it right now, but looks super cool. The art's amazing. There's been a bunch of people who are talking about it, and I love, there's like a game board that everybody has that these cards go on and as you play, and it just looks like a really cool game to check out. So I definitely, if you're listening to this, check them out on Instagram, or you can go to daywalkersyndicate.com, check out their gaming. So be sure to do that. But let me get to the question here. He says, well met, Adam and Matthew. I first and foremost wanted to let you know how much I've been enjoying listening to your show. It's been great hearing your thoughts and experiences on your paths to becoming GMs, and how you show there isn't just one way to go about it. And I'm glad that that's been coming across. That's really cool. I've been a GM for some time now, so for me, I've been listening and learning about ways to improve my players' gaming experience. So thank you for making this show for everyone, not just new GMs. Now to my question. There has been a lot of discussion on world building and campaign design and ambiance and the such, all which are important. But what are your thoughts on using modules in pre-made campaigns? This is in parentheses, maybe not something as intense as Curse of Strahd for people to get their feet wet with. Thanks again for taking the time to answer questions. I look forward to listening to many more great conversations from y'all. Chris Case from Daywalker Syndicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of modules being out there, because I know so many people who they're not going to sit down and write like a whole story themselves. And they're like, I don't even know where to start. And I'm just trying to figure out how to do this. I don't know how to put, all of the stuff that a module, a pre-made campaigns. Well, let me talk about these separately. Modules, I'm a big fan of, and I'm a big fan of them because I think it brings all the monster stats. It brings like the decision points, and it brings like description, and it brings all this stuff together. So somebody who's just starting out will be able to think about all those things in turn. If they might have forgotten that stuff, if they're trying to make their own campaign, they would probably focus more narrowly and maybe forget some of that stuff, right, and then kind of feel stuck at the table. And that brings it all together. And I would say that even and you say you've been GMing a long time, you probably do this as well. Even as an experienced GM, I have a campaign that like I made up the whole story of what this is going to be, but that does not mean that I don't like find modules that I'm like, ooh, I like this. And who they have is like the big badness is I could twist to be something in mine, and I'm going to grab this and kind of twist this module a little bit and plant it right in my game. And I've done that many times. And I'm very careful not to tell my players what modules I'm looking at, because I found that players can now find modules anywhere, and they love to know what's coming so that they can beat it really good. But so I definitely twist things up. But I take modules and use those even as an experienced GM. A lot of times that is a very creative jumping off point for me, and I use those. Now, when you say pre-made campaigns, like I'm thinking of this as like a full, the full campaign arc. That's a little harder for me, because I feel like it's harder for me as a GM not to feel like I'm railroading. And this may just be my experiences, because, pre-made campaigns definitely have an end in view, and everything leads to that end. And sometimes, depending on the writers of the campaigns, some may be better at giving you options, but it's really hard to take a campaign at the beginning and say, all right, this is going to kind of organically evolve as we go. Even though I know like an endpoint, that's different than when I've tried to do, like when I've seen pre-made campaigns, it very much feels like you go from this to this to this to this. And if the characters decide they're going off in Crazyville, it's harder for me to stick with a pre-made campaign. So what I love to do, and this is just me personally, what I love to do is I love to grab modules from all over the place and stick them in my game. And I see people online. It's like, hey, has anybody taken, I forget which one he mentioned there.
Curse of Strahd.
Curse of Strahd. Yeah. Has anybody adapted that to 5e? And they're like really worried because they want to make sure that, all the stat blocks have been updated and like the rules and stuff. I feel very free to take something from a 2e game. I actually have the whole Dragon, what was the magazine?
Dragon Magazine, or
maybe it was Dragon Magazine.
White Dwarf was one, I think, too.
Dragon Magazine. I have like a whole backlog of those, like just years and years and years of those. And I'll go back into those and I'll find stories and I'll be like, oh, this one's awesome. It's from 2E, or this one's from, 3, or this one's from, whatever. This one's a Pathfinder thing, but I'll take it and I'll just plant it down in mine, and I'll make my own changes to the way stat blocks go. And if there's rule changes, that's me as an experienced GM. So I do think, like, again, this is not just for beginners. When you're a beginner, I do think it's good to get like a module that is not too complicated, because some of them can be very complicated. And like when I pick a module out of like an old DM magazine, sometimes those things are huge and I have to read them multiple times in order to get my head around all the different things that are going to be happening in there and what I've got to be ready for. And so you don't just want to pick that up like the day before your gaming session and like think, okay, I'll throw this in. That's something you have to plan for. But I do think that as a beginning GM, so we talk a lot about Josh, partially because he's always watching when we're doing this. He's probably on here right now. But Josh, he recently ran his first campaign. Not recently, I guess it's been a little while now. But it was like Trouble with Kobolds. Was that the? It was like a module that's made
Yeah, we
for
did a
5e,
module.
and it was one where he could get in, and it was pretty simple start, and it kind of explained, here's options and here's how things can go, and it wasn't overly complicated. And I think for a beginning GM, that is like an amazing place to start, because you have a hard time coming up with all that when you're doing your first game ever. But then very few GMs that I know will continue to just grab those like easy ones and only do what is written. Or to do like a full campaign in that manner. Typically, I'll find that they take modules once they start getting more and more experience. They'll take modules and they'll throw in parts of those, or they'll take the big bad from that, or they'll take this puzzle room from that, or whatever it is, and they begin to like put pieces in. But I do want to say that as a GM, I in no way look down at pre-made modules. And maybe pre-made campaigns. I don't know. I might take some convincing, and that might just be my background or the pre-made campaigns that I've actually seen. But I know that I read, we all have Reddit now, and you'll get people on there that'll be like, oh man, we ran this campaign. And I can't for the life of me, I can't come up with any campaign name. Tomb of Horrors, that one's like really bad. That one's really tough. But they'll talk about like, I ran this campaign and it was awesome because this happened and this happened, and great stories come out of those pre-made campaigns and those modules as well. So do not think, oh man, Matthew and Adam just sit and talk about like all this doing stuff on the fly and being able to like change it based on what their characters did at the end of every campaign. And that's not the only way to start. The whole idea is start, and then as you feel comfortable, begin to modify and twist, and then you'll get to a place where you're making up so much, but you're grabbing stuff from modules and shoving them in. At least me, I in no way hide the fact that I am a master plagiarist. I take little parts from every campaign and put them in. My big thing is making sure my players don't know that they're from a specific campaign, because I don't want them like trying to get the drop on me.
Yeah. I had so many thoughts during all that.
During that block of talking that Matthew does.
I need to start writing notes, but I think there's the one aspect of what works for you as a GM, make sure to do, kind of thing. So like, I typically don't do super well with adding I don't do, like Matthew, you've talked about that, and I've seen it like work super well to grab a module, to like tear it apart, to take what you want, stick it in. I think I don't do well with that. And I feel like it usually comes off pretty flat for me when I run that. I think it's probably because I get too stuck. So I'm kind of in this weird limbo of I'm trying to jam it in, but I didn't try super hard. And then to be honest here, this is the honest thing. When I've done that, usually I'm like, oh shoot, I don't know where I'm going with this game. And I have to run something tonight. And this hasn't been a ton, but it's been enough where it's like, modules, 5e modules, and it's like, I'm just trying to grab something that's not known and throw it in here. So that's an issue that I have. And it's the preparation. It's like you said, you can't just like show up and be like, oh, I'm going to run this 12-page module with like 5 minutes warning. Is probably not going to go super smooth. At least it's not for me. Right. But that being said, that's a me thing where like Matthew, you can do that well and have done it well. So I think like figuring out, with that kind of thing, what's the best for you, whether you're new or a veteran or anywhere in between. I do think I would encourage like brand new people to either like GMing in general, or Josh or Wataya mentioned running a few modules before being finally comfortable with making his own stuff. If you're like changing systems, maybe doing something different, like that's a good way to get an idea of like the rules, the action economy, like, okay, how do things actually move around the table, without having to like do the story part too. So I definitely do, for like somebody new who's wanting to get their feet wet, to grab something like that, and run it. Um, Josh set up above. I'll never forget when playing in a pre-made campaign when I was told, no, you can't do that as it's not in the module. Worst feeling ever. And like, to speak into that a little bit from my point of view, I would not want to be in that position telling somebody, no, you just can't do that because we're on these tracks, kind of thing. But I also kind of like, before that, I think for me, looking at pre-made stuff, um, manage expectations at the beginning, I think is important. Just like talking to your table, the communication that happens there, of, if I come in and somebody's running like, hey, I want to run a one shot tonight, and I'm running Weeby Goblins. That was the name of Josh's thing. He said, he's like, we're running Weeby Goblins. I'm going to come into that with the understanding, and after some talk, of like, okay, there's an A, B, and C, and that's the game. So I'm not going to try to get in a boat and go across the world in the middle of this one shot that we're trying to do in 3 hours, kind of thing. Like, I'm going to suspend that disbelief, and like, we're going to be in this kind of deal. So I think that's really important with modules, is just to communicate. And even if we're going to expand out to like a pre-made campaign, to talk into that prior, if that session 0 kind of thing, like, hey, I want to run this thing. It's probably going to be 5 sessions based on our time. Please don't look at the stuff ahead of time. But there's kind of a story arc that we're going to be going through. I don't know how much I actually talked about that, but when I'm running the game with Eric, who was on a few weeks back, and then Evan, who we'll hopefully see here soon, I'm running a Sentinels RPG game right now with them. And this is kind of in this realm because it's actually a game I ran with the Thursday crew like 3 years ago. And I'm using it like a module with them. Part of that was just time. I didn't feel like I could like creatively make a completely new game. And the other thing was like, I liked it. So I'm kind of using my own game from 3 years ago with a different group as a module for those guys. And I think there was a little bit of a conversation, and just there's an understanding, because they know that of like, there's kind of a point A to point B thing. And there have been things that have changed because their characters are different and they've done things that are different. But the main part of the game, the main arc, is pretty much staying the same. So maybe my encouragement, I guess, is for like a pre-made campaign, if you're listening and thinking about that, is like, are there ways to be flexible within a session that you can still veer off the road, but then come back into it, not deny your players, but also like, there is a story we're moving forward to communicate with your people. So I don't know. I feel like I was all over the place with that, but I definitely, if you're new, I do think getting an understanding of how a game flows and the way the rules work can be really helpful to use a module to kind of start that out.
And as always, GMs are people, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
so take into account, what is your personality?
Mm-hmm.
There are some GMs that are like I don't want to say lawyer because that sounds too strict, but like the strategist who thinks through everything and has possibilities planned in this module. They know how they're going to handle it if their people do this or that, or ask to do this or ask to do that. And they want to know all the options, and they rehearse it, and they're like super polished, and they go through, and it's like a joy to play that game because like they're ready and they're like amazing. And then there's those people who are, it's really hard for them to ever follow a script, and they're constantly going off in their own little, they're like never on script because they're more the artist, right? And they're like, They hate to be tied down.
Right. Yeah.
Know your personality. Adam was talking about how I am the guy who rips stuff, and I'm like Dr. Frankenstein. I'm like sewing it together, and I'm like, it's alive. I got it to work. It's alive, and I'm going. But that's not everybody's personality, and so don't try to be that if you're not that person. And use the modules according to your personality too.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't remember how much this was talked about, but the that adventure we released, that is a game that I've run that session kind of as a one shot or as like a start to a campaign 4 different times with 4 different groups of people, and then it was tweaked to kind of make this adventure. But that's another one where again I'm like reusing my own stuff, so I don't know if this fits exactly what we're talking about, but I do see value in that of just like talking about being people. We have a finite amount of time and creativity, and sometimes it's very helpful to be like, hey, here's a thing that I can like learn and understand, and now I'm gonna like facilitate this tonight, and we're gonna have fun. It's gonna be great. So yeah, I definitely, if that's a good thing for people, I think it's like well worth the use of them.
All right, let's hit our second question for today.
Yeah, so we had an email from Wataya Hotel, and just pulling that up here. This is the Haversack question, pig in the city. Now, Wataya Hotel was in the chat a minute ago. I don't know if you're still there, but I would like an explanation on that, because yeah, I'm not sure, but I want to hear that from you.
We didn't see any pigs in the city in this question, so we're wondering what that's about.
So he says, "Dear Matthew and Adam, we've heard a lot about both of your interests as DMs, but this week I'd like to ask about your preferences as players. My question is this: when creating a character that you will play, do you come up with a backstory first or choose a class? Additionally, do you have a class or type of class that you are drawn to? Thanks. Sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98. And then there is a PS to this for me and you, Matthew, specifically. But he said, if you're ever in need of RPG music, here's a link to my YouTube channel that may have what you need. I've got a decent amount of playlists that I continue to update, and I'll ask him too if that's something that is wanting to be more out there. But thank you. And he's saying in the chat, no connection whatsoever using movie subtitles for my email subject lines. Okay. we scoured the email. I looked over it several times. I'm like, what is this? And that makes more sense to me. So thank you for keeping us lively. So backstory class, Matthew, what do you think about typically, and what are you drawn to?
For me, I almost always choose a class with a general kind of personality in mind before I do the backstory. For me, so I'll tell you this. Rarely do I pick certain classes. You ask if there's certain kinds. We're still on that. Let's put up his comment there here. Boom, got it. When creating a character, you come up with a backstory first, or choose a class, and do you have one that you're more drawn to? I am absolutely drawn to one type of class. I never pick like the big, huge tank who like never has mobility and just absorbs damage. That's rarely. I'm trying to think if I've ever done that. I also never pick the wizard. The glass cannon wizard who is like super powerful but super weak. That's usually not me either. I am almost always a striker with high mobility. So I do a good amount of damage. I have a good amount of mobility. It's up in the air whether I have like much in the way of hit points. It's up in the air about whether I'm going to be able to absorb much, or I'm never. I would say I am almost never a healer or a support guy who buffs other people. It's a very selfish kind of character that I'm drawn toward. I like to be all over the place wherever I want to be when I need to be, and I like to be able to deal some damage. But based on those kinds of characters, and that can be lots of guys. That can be like a monk. I've had a monk who takes a vow of poverty, but also flies and shoots soul knives out of his hands. Aramis Balathon. Or whether it's like a magus who like delivers spells through his swords, but he's like super, mobile. They have different personalities, and I love to develop those different personalities very deeply. But I almost always start with like a type of class that feels kind of unique that still has those two things, mobility and firepower. But based on that, I try to pick a different personality each time I play, and then develop that so that it's a very unique character for me. And when you say unique, they are, because I've been like I said, okay, Aramis Balathon was this guy who took a vow of poverty, so he had nothing. He had no weapons, no armor, no nothing. Well, when you're a monk, you don't need the armor. You got the wisdom and you got your dexterity, and this I think was 3.5. I can't even remember. And he was the kind of soul blade alternate that actually shot the soul blades, whatever that is. So he could fly, and he was a changeling. This guy's all over crazy, but he could fly and shoot stuff. And he had nothing he had to keep on him, because he made his own soul blade. He didn't wear armor. And so his whole personality was that he was against everybody who was greedy and who took advantage of other people. So he was always for the poor person. He was always for the oppressed. And he had a vow of poverty himself. So he was never trying to get the treasure in the game. He was never trying to get items in the game. Yeah, that's one guy. Then I had this other, this tiefling who could bamf around. I forget what was his... I'm trying to remember what he was exactly. But he had this thing that he could...
Warlock, I think.
He was a warlock, and when he would come in, he would throw this curse on people. And whenever he killed somebody that had a curse on him, he would get extra, teleportations, bamfs, we called them. He could bamf around. So he'd step in, and he had made meta magic so that he could make this go further. And so he would like curse everybody into place. And then anytime he would kill one of those, he would get extra movement. And his whole personality was, I am the magic against magic. You guys are the brute against brute. So he never took on the big hard guys, the ogres and the champions. His whole thing was to curse somebody and kill those little guys up front enough that he could bamf behind the lines and get to the magic caster in the back. And so he was always going after the magic caster, and that was his whole sole purpose in life. I am magic against magic, so you can be physical against physical. That was a cool personality. And then, every person I have, I try to get something unique, but it's always to do with mobility. And it's always to do with, once I get in there, I can do some damage. Now, I may die myself. We'll see. But that's my, just to give you a little glimpse into Matthew's mind, that's where I love to be. I love that kind of character. And they can be everything from like these sarcastic devils to these, saintly vow of poverty monks to everything in between.
Yeah. It feels like a type more than a class that you're drawn to. So
definitely.
And I feel like I get that. First question. So backstory or class, I feel like almost always it's going to be class. And part of that is I feel like a lot of times in games, I'm waiting around to see what everybody else is picking. And then I know you don't have to, but I'm always thinking about like, is there a role that needs to like fill, and maybe
he knows Matthew is never going to fill the healer role. I don't know if you've ever been the healer though, have you?
Never full on. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever. The WoW game that you ran. I think that was you running that. Yeah, the WoW game that you ran, I was a priest that would heal, but that's the only time I've ever been a healer. I always like, though I do. This is veering, but I like to be able to heal, but not be the healer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I like. Actually, Wataya Hotel is going to run a 5e game that's going to be like once a month kind of thing. And I'm going to play Bard. And I will definitely have Healing Word, because that is the most beautiful spell when you have people hitting the ground. It's like, nope, back up, kind of thing, and it's a bonus and all that stuff. So I like to have the variety, the utility of the thing. And I think that's probably that's one of the driving forces for me as like a class is I love utility. I love skills. So I'm going to always be drawn to, you know, the skilled characters. And that was a little bit of sadness for me with the Switch. And there are skills and there's ways to use them. I don't want to downplay that in 5e, but that was a little bit of a sadness for me of the change when 5e came out, was just being used to having this giant list of skills that you could really just maximize out in like a 3.5 game or Pathfinder. And yeah, Wataya Hotels, my bard is an ASMR bard, but I am going to be an ASMR bard also, like tapping on things and whispering to people to inspire them. So it's trying to play on the words a little bit, but so skill, I'm going to be drawn to skills. So rogue, ranger, which was my starting thing. And we've talked before about how I like to sneak off down hallways and get killed and things like that. But
he always wants to be out first. Yeah. In the middle of things.
I want that discovery and that exploration to happen. And so I struggled a little bit. I loved Cormac, my barbarian, may he rest in peace, a ton. And I love that character. But I struggled hard with the skill thing. Like that was like,
he also had a low intelligence, right?
Yeah. Intelligence wasn't like, skill. It was like a 10, so I wasn't getting anything out of it. And so that was a tough part for me. I think so, like definitely a skilled class is typically what I'm going to aim for, the bard, the rogues, the rangers, that type of people. But trying to think of anything else that I do like utility. So people who can do a lot of different things. So if I go magic, I'm tending to not just want to be like everything is a damaging blasting spell, but it's more like, okay, I can make a hole there and make a fog cloud over here, and I can buff this person and throw up a wall, and I'll shoot a magic missile. Yeah, I do like controllers. That was something I recognized about myself when we played 4E. We played 4th edition. That was the first time I'd ever heard people talk about controllers. And I don't know if that was a thing prior that people talked about, but that was a thing where I started hearing about the idea of a controller. It's like, that is what I want to do.
Controlling the battlefield.
Yeah. And I will say, I don't typically want to be the like enchanter controller. I love that as a GM though. Love dominate person.
He loves to dominate that really fast guy who does a lot of damage and then make him fight his own party.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, I think skilled classes, that's probably I'm belaboring it, but that's probably what it comes down to for me is skilled classes.
For me, it's almost always mobility. And I also love changelings because I like to do lots of different characters, which is why I love GMing. I love to do all the characters that my characters are not.
Yeah.
And so even when I'm a player character, I'm like, I need to have more than just one voice and one face.
Yeah.
I don't even know if changelings are a thing anymore in 5e. Are they?
Yeah.
Are they? Yeah.
I would have to look. I can't remember. I do say, I would say with the backstory thing, I feel like race more and more for me comes, it fits more into the backstory idea than it's not necessarily like, okay, I pick my class, now I'm going to pick a race that like optimizes, like that's not always, that used to be kind of the only thing I would go with. And it's like, it's not necessarily maximize or an optimization or anything. It's more like, okay, I have this class now. What do I want to do with like what could be happening and what race like fits into that kind of thing for me. So
I like what Taya Hotel just put in the comments, and that is this idea of he said going from warlock to barbarian was a big change for me, but putting myself in that box challenged my creativity in a good way. And I'd recommend all players getting out of your comfort zone. That's true. There have been a few times when I played a character that is so not my normal character, and I've always had fun doing it. because, like you said, there with constraint comes creativity. Sometimes you have to like give yourself boundaries in order to like really be creative in new ways. And so I agree with that. Although I'm still almost always going to pick the mobile damager.
I think that's a good thing too. Like even thinking GM, it's a great experience to stretch as a player, as a GM. That kind of puts you in a place where maybe even like you have an understanding of the way combat could work from different aspects. Like I do think I probably lean towards certain even enemy characters because of the way I play games, and that can help flesh it out. So what I'm hearing most of all is that in the next campaign that we have, Matthew will be a plate armored dwarf.
Never. A plate armored dwarf who just heals people.
Yep, that's it.
It's like, why did he pick that? Let it never be. May it never be. Canon. All right. I think that's all the questions we have. Am I right there?
Yep, that's all
right. Well, hey, even through all of our crashes on the computer and people coming to the door, we're glad you joined us and stuck with us here in the middle of this episode today of Rise of the GM. Do join us next week when we are going to be talking about inspiration from environment, right? Inspiration for places around us that we've been. So that's going to be a good one. Join us next week on Rise of the GM. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you then.